Hey, everybody. I have the distinct pleasure of being able to talk with the first person in Eastvale who has ever gotten COVID-19, Jordan Lyall. So, Jordan, thank you so much for being on this Zoom call with us. I think it's going to be hugely important, hugely valuable for a lot of people. So, first of all, I just want to know, how are you feeling right now? How are you doing?
Honestly, I feel really good right now, physically speaking, at least. Symptoms free for like 2 weeks now.
Great.
My immediate family, my wife and two kids never got any symptoms. So
Oh,
praise the Lord for that.
praise the Lord.
Um, yeah, honestly, I feel really good at the moment.
Good. Now, Jordan, you're a follower of Jesus Christ, right?
That is correct.
And I've heard that you attend a pretty amazing church. Is that right?
It's a pretty cool place. Yeah, it's called VantagePoint. Have you heard of it?
I have heard of it. Man, that pastor, I've heard that he's pretty amazing.
It's
This,
pretty cool.
this
Yeah.
interview is going south quick. So, okay. So here's what a lot of people want to know. So how'd you get it?
Yeah, interesting story. So at the kind of mid to tail end of February, I was invited on a work trip to Europe. So it was kind of last minute. I was invited to speak at a couple conferences in London and Paris. I jumped at the chance. I hadn't really explored London. I'd never been to Paris, so I was really excited for that. Great career move, right? I get to travel internationally and speak about the work that I'm doing, the products that I'm building. Yes, there was kind of some concern that like, hey, there's this thing in China, it's starting to spread. But at the time, there wasn't much going on. Not many, if any, cases confirmed in the UK or France. So we knew there was some risk, but I decided to take the opportunity and travel. And in London and Paris, everyone was pretty, we stayed on top of it, right? We were elbow bumping and kicking each other, like slapping feet, and we were taking every precaution. I carried with me the hand sanitizer. Everyone was pretty good. I mean, later we find out that it's so easy to transmit even without just by being around someone and breathing the same air. It just kind of jumps from body to body. But then we didn't know quite as much, but we still took the precautions. It ended up being that a few dozen people at this event in France tested positive. So that's just the people that experienced symptoms and tested positive. It could have been even more. So even though we took all the precautions, the necessary measures, washed our hands all the time, it's still infected a great number of us. I can kind of pinpoint it down to a couple different moments, different run-ins with certain groups based on who also came down with it and tested positive. So I can start to pinpoint exactly when and where. But essentially that's the story. Traveled internationally for work, and obviously it puts testing positive puts a damper on my trip. Otherwise, it was a really fun trip, just with this downside of the worst souvenir you could pick up of the COVID-19 virus.
Okay, well, tell us how did the symptoms start, and what did you have?
Yeah, well, a couple days after returning from my trip, just started overall exhaustion and respiratory issues, kind of shortness of breath, uh, coughing a lot, had weird like abdominal issues. Weird things started to develop like body sweats and body aches and chills, but I never had a fever. And that was really interesting because that's like the number one thing that everyone talks about, right? People are giving each other, the thermometer before they walk into a public place. Because I'd never developed a high temperature, the doctor didn't want to test me. Didn't think it was worth it. So I fought for 3 days to try and get Kaiser to give me a test. I said, this is really weird. I was just traveling internationally. It's this weird combination of symptoms that I've never felt before. Yes, I know I don't have a fever, but I did my research and a percentage of people never get a fever. So please give me a test. And I was able to finally get a test. And that was it. Just weird mix of symptoms. It was like this bad combination that lasted about 2 weeks, ups and downs, of course, but it was like a really bad flu mixed with really bad pneumonia, and it was bad. And relatively healthy and relatively young. So it was just a weird situation.
So you finally got tested for it at some point then, right?
I did. I was finally able to convince them, like, hey, I'm serious here. This is not a joke. I'm not being overly concerned. Here's what I found. Like, I had to show them that, like, hey, I read this thing, and you can actually, number of people have tested positive that never experienced a fever. Here, let's do it. Not joking around. Let's do it. And they finally did give me a test. And yes, as far as I know, I was the first positive test at Kaiser Fontana. They kept me outside. They really didn't have the infrastructure built up for testing yet.
Mm.
So I had to do everything outside, and they had to put on the hazmat suit and come test me. And it was, yeah, it was a wild experience.
So take me to that moment when you first hear that you're testing positive. Where are you and what are you feeling in that moment?
I'm sitting in bed talking to my wife, and the funny thing is, so back up a couple days in between testing and receiving the results, we had a really weird experience where I received what appeared to me as negative results. It ended up being a false negative, I guess. So when they tested me, they did it twice, and ran multiple tests. They're going to test for the flu to make sure that you don't have the regular flu. They're going to test for all these other respiratory things, and then they're also going to test for COVID. Flu and stuff they can figure out same day. COVID takes a couple of days to process. I received an email that night, the night that I tested, saying that a bunch of different tests that they ran, coronavirus not detected. It literally said coronavirus not detected. We're jumping for joy. Uh, we're free. That we this is something else. We don't have it. Hallelujah! Call and tell everyone, guys. It's not COVID. Turns out, if that come to find out, right? Coronavirus is just is more of a general term for the type of virus, right? COVID-19 is the actual coronavirus in 2019, like that's where it comes from. So I thought I was in the clear. I was in the clear for this normal, random, or usual strain of coronavirus. Turns out they hadn't run the test for COVID-19 yet, and so I spent a couple days. Pros and cons, right? Pros, I was like, yes, I don't have it. Awesome. The cons were like, well, what about all these symptoms that I'm getting? Maybe it's just anxiety. Am I building it up in my head? What's going on? And then Sunday morning, literally, we're getting ready to watch service online. I get a call from Kaiser, from the hospital, saying, and it was really, really weird. He was almost too nice, like almost too friendly. The doctor calling me, hey, buddy, just want to let you know that the test came back and you tested positive.
Huh.
And it was almost like with everything that we've had to deal with, it was really hard to sink in. It didn't really sink in at first.
Yeah.
For a split second, I thought it was somebody calling to troll me. I thought it was a joke. Somebody was playing a trick. But then he just kept going and started talking about next steps and how I need to isolate. And it was just kind of all hitting me at the same time, and mix of emotions for sure. We laughed about it first. It might sound completely asinine, but my wife and I just joked about it. Of course, sort of this stuff happens to us. Of course, I would get it. And then it started to set in. Started calling family. Started calling people that I may have been in contact with the past few days. Even though the majority, for the most part, I quarantined. Even at the first sight of potential symptoms, there were people that I interacted with prior to any symptoms that I just had to let them know, and like, hey, if there's any chance, I just wanted to give you the heads up before too long. And it was just a really weird experience of, hey, we got this thing, and then it's just trying to figure out, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, kind of a crazy experience. Isn't it crazy that, like, with all the testing going on, that the hospital would send out an email that said coronavirus not detected? For someone that's waiting on coronavirus results, to have that in an email is such a roller coaster of emotions. It was insane.
And Jordan, one of the things that I really appreciate about you is just your conscientiousness in the matter. You didn't know whether you had it or not, or once you knew that you had contracted it, I mean, you went on social media, you let people know so that they could be aware of the fact. You contacted everybody that you'd been in contact with. So anybody who's watching this that hadn't been in contact with you, they have nothing to fear about. I mean, you were really out there and you were really concerned not only for your own safety, but also for the safety of other people. And
That
so,
was my biggest concern. Yeah,
yeah,
is I knew I would probably get through it. It was a rough couple of weeks, some really low points, but I knew I would come out of this. I was more concerned with who else did I infect?
sure.
Maybe some elderly or pre-existing condition patient might come along, through that tree, and somehow I might have infected other people. That was my biggest concern, is who others that I may have impacted.
Yeah. Now, you talked about going into a dark place. Anybody would. Can you talk to us about what was the darkest time for you and what was the hardest part about having COVID?
Well, it was more than just a physical toll, right? And it got bad. I mentioned that there were a couple of days, and there was, I guess you could call it a peak, even though there seemed to be some peaks and valleys, which made it really hard. Like, are we on the tail end? Am I just getting started? Is
Yeah.
this the worst, or are we just? So it was really hard to kind of manage in that respect. But so you have the physical pain. I mentioned some of that. You have the mental anxiety that I was dealing with. Who else did I infect? As I mentioned, worried for my kids and wife. Uh, Concerned about, this is when some of the economy was starting to shut down. What else is going on? You're hearing projections, really low projections, really high projections at the high end, would be like lots and lots of people getting sick and potentially dying. Really stressful situation. My company, obviously, like many companies, are going through some tough moments right now where they need to let a lot of people go. So it was always a concern. I'm worried about so many different things. Uh, Concern for other people's safety. It was like everything coming together.
Yeah.
Like my physical symptoms. I honestly told myself, at what point do I call the ER? Because I knew if things got really bad, I'd have to go to the hospital. Because they initially told me just stay home. I never actually went into the hospital outside of getting tested. But when the results came in, they should just isolate, stay in the bedroom. So for weeks, I had to stay in the bedroom, separated from my family. So here I am, physical symptoms, mental anguish, removed from my family and everyone else. Um, all of a sudden, Tuesday night, it was two days after testing positive, my son comes down with these weird symptoms, and he's vomiting every couple of hours. This happens for 24 hours. He's honestly showing signs of an appendicitis. Um, just a couple years ago, we had to deal with an appendicitis and appendectomy on Gracie, our youngest daughter. And so we kind of knew the symptoms. As a kid, I went through appendicitis as well. So we knew the symptoms we needed to watch out for. And honestly, the first thought when we thought there was a chance that he had appendicitis was, of course, why not? And we laughed it off. As crazy as it is to sound, like we knew, okay, God is in control. He's got this. We've been through this before, just a couple years ago with our daughter. We know what's going to happen. Extra twist, extra spin on it with the whole COVID stuff. But we kind of saw this playing out. And okay, if he does have to have surgery, it's going to go like this. It's going to be this many days in the hospital. So we kind of felt almost at peace, as crazy as that sounds, with everything that's going on. It's just one more thing we have to deal with. So imagine this: my wife has to take my son to the ER, potentially has appendicitis, but there's this extra spin that, like, even though he hasn't tested positive yet, or hadn't been tested at that point, since he's been around me, they wanted to take every precaution in the ER, so they put him in a separate quarantine room. Sure. He's 10 years old and he has to go through all this. Everyone that treated him, they had to wear hazmat suits. What a scary moment for anyone, let alone a 10-year-old. And so we're dealing with that. It ended up being okay. He didn't have appendicitis after all. It was this this similar symptoms, but it was a stomach virus, not related to COVID. But we're dealing with
So
that.
he didn't have COVID then.
He hadn't actually been tested, but never developed any symptoms.
Yeah, great.
And now, it's been months, or over a month now since we've been in contact, so that they didn't feel they needed to test him. He's been isolating, just the whole family has been.
Yeah.
So that was a blessing, but at the time it was very stressful. My son's in the ER. I'm dealing with something really painful, the emotional stuff. Everything's kind of coming together, and that was really just the lowest of the lows. A really tough moment for me. Thinking through, I'm the type of guy that jumps right to the worst case scenario, just trying to think out, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. If that happens, in an effort of like risk mitigation, this is how we're going to handle the situation when it hits the fan.
Yeah.
And of course, my brain jumps to, well, what if I don't make it out of this thing? What's going to happen here and pay all the bills? And how are we going to do all this stuff?
Yeah.
Obviously, things that you shouldn't be stressing about, but that's just what happens with my little brain. And
sure.
Just building on top of this thing. And I just remember my wife, the rock that she is and that she has been throughout this whole thing, just praying with me and saying, God, we may have to call the ER again and bring Jordan in. We just pray that he's able to fall asleep. This is the middle of the night, 1 or 2. We pray that he's able to fall asleep. We'll reevaluate things in the morning. Make it be clear whether we need to call the ER or not. And then I was, from that point on, totally at peace, fell right asleep, woke up in the morning.
Wow.
And I was feeling much better.
Wow.
So that night was really the high point of everything kind of coming together. The next morning, peace. And that was kind of the turning point. Wow. My son at that point was actually feeling better, just some quick meds, and he was back on his feet. I started turning the corner in terms of symptoms. And it was totally a God thing, only through prayer and the peace that I found there. And then just the support of my wife really just got me through that dark time.
That's awesome. Well, Jordan, we know that hindsight is 2020, right? You're over COVID. Praise the Lord. We all prayed for your safety. We love you. We cared for you. But now that you're looking back on the entire situation, what do you feel like God was trying to teach you in those darkest moments?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I keep thinking about that because I want it to be clear, like, of why we're going through this as a society, why we as a family are going through this, why I personally got it. Some signs, some flags we can hang and say, this is what happened. Yeah. And it's going to be a process, right? It's going to take time. It's only been a couple of weeks. But the first things that jump out to me really are surround yourself with the community. We moved to Eastvale just 2 years ago, and that was the big factor, is that we were in an apartment in LA and didn't have a ton of community. We had some friends, but we didn't really have a community, a church community, a local neighborhood, friends and family. And that was a big thing of why we came out here. And it really kind of, it bloomed, it blossomed. We saw the fruit of that effort and a lot of the credit goes to my wife. I'm pretty, reserved, but my wife is always making friends. So it's majority of people that came around us are because, we're because my wife just can't help but talk to everyone and be friends with everybody. So I owe everything to her. But it was really just surround yourself with community. We have a great small group through the church. Our neighborhood, just everybody came together, people in VantagePoint, people in Eastvale that we didn't even know, that just signed up and said, hey, we're coming to bring you food, we're coming to bring you supplies. People were asking, what do you guys need? Other people didn't even ask, they just started bringing us stuff. Here's a bunch of soup, pre-made food, and here's some cleaning supplies. I'm like, oh great. We had so much food at one point, like it was crazy. We're just trying to finish everything so it didn't go bad. It really was, okay, here's why we develop community. Yes, it's fun to be celebrating the wins. But in these times, this is why we surround ourselves with people in a small group, and this is why we make friends. Not the church community is really important, so important, but it's also, I would just encourage everyone who may be spending too much time with Christians to widen the net, so to speak, to zoom out and you know, expand your scope to non-Christians, people in the community, people in your cul-de-sac and neighborhood,
Yeah.
because and just lean on each other, not literally, not physically, but just surround yourself. And it's easy for me to say, looking back, hindsight, like you said, and I owe it mostly to my wife, because she, like I said, she can't help but surround our family with people that love us. And it's been, yeah, it's truly been amazing.
Well, great. Well, Jordan, I'm just glad that you're healthy. I'm glad that you're over this. I'm glad that you're not quarantined anymore.
Yes, I can at least leave the bedroom, and now we're just confined to like our properties. So that's great.
After all of this is done, I want my propane tank back.
Oh yeah, we should get on that. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Well, thanks so much for being on the phone call, Jordan. I think there were a lot of people who just really benefited from your story, and we're praying for you the whole time. So love you, bro.
Love you, man. Appreciate it.